Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And for today's episode, we are going to be ranking the studio albums of the greatest band to ever come out of Liverpool, England. Not to mention my third favorite recording artists of all time, the legendary Echo and the Bunnymen. Echo and the Bunnymen were formed in Liverpool, England in 1978 by Ian McCulloch, Will Sargent, and Les Pattinson. For the first year and a half of the band's career, Echo and the Bunnymen performed as a three-piece alongside a drum machine that the band nicknamed Echo, hence the origin of the band's somewhat unusual moniker. But by 1980, the band had grown tired of Echo and her controlling ways and sent the drum machine packing in favor of a percussionist that was actually soaked in human flesh and blood. To fill the void, the band recruited an incredibly talented drummer by the name of Peter DeFreitas, who, with him in place, Echo and the Bunnymen rounded out what would become their classic lineup. Not long after cementing the band's original classic lineup, they began releasing some of the best and, I think, most important records of the post-punk era, a string of albums that would, in fact, eventually lead to them being thought of as one of the most influential bands of the entire decade. Now, for me, my personal relationship with this band began as probably a little kid. I'll sort of never forget the first time I became aware of who Echo and the Bunnymen were. I remember seeing a video for the band on MTV, and I remember the fact that I saw their name in the credits of the video, and I was completely appalled by that. I remember thinking to myself, why would you call yourself Echo and the Bunnymen? That's stupid. Can't help the fact that I was an asinine little brat, but I just happened to be. As far as my fandom goes, it wasn't really spawned until probably the mid-1990s. I remember being turned on to the band by a guy that I worked with, somebody that I had grown up with, sort of not really knowing him very well, but my first job outside when I got out of high school, when I was sort of going to college, was at a fast food place where I flipped burgers, and I happened to meet this guy. And he and I became very good friends in a relatively short period of time. He and I were very sort of musically simpatico. And I remember it was riding around in his car one day that he began playing Echo and the Bunnymen. And I remember hearing the name, and of course this was a band that, eventually I sort of became more aware of through sort of like the John Hughes movies in the 1980s. It seemed like they were one of those like John Hughes bands. And it was right around this time I was sort of beginning to develop more of an interest in punk rock, post-punk, new wave, and 80s music. And there was something about this band that just hit me right in the gut, and it's something that has stuck with me ever since. I have been a huge fan of Echo and the Bunnymen, probably since around that era, around the mid-1990s. Now, I'm fortunate in the sense that this is a band that I have gotten to see live on many occasions, and I have to tell you, if you have not had an opportunity to see this band as of yet, I highly recommend you take the opportunity if it presents itself before these guys end up calling it a career. This is one of the greatest live bands that I have ever seen consistently. Every show basically I've been to, with the exception of maybe one, this band is always at the top of their game. Now, that being said, I would never make the argument, at least especially at this point in time, that Ian McCulloch is necessarily the most dynamic live performer that I've ever seen in my life. But when you go see Echo and the Bunnymen live, they are spot on, perfect, basically with every song. And Ian McCulloch's voice, although it has aged a lot and changed a lot over the years, his voice live is still one of the most powerful vocal performances that I've ever seen. A couple of my favorite times ever seeing Echo and the Bunnymen live was, number one is Easy. Now, it wasn't the first time I ever saw the band, but my wife and I went to go see Echo and the Bunnymen in 2018 in San Francisco at the Masonic. And if you're sort of unfamiliar with the Masonic, it's this big old beast of a place. But considering its size, it actually tends to sound pretty good. My wife and I have been to several shows there. Actually, we went to go see one of my wife's favorite bands, Placebo, play at the Masonic in San Francisco, which was honestly one of the best shows I'd ever been to. It's the only time I ever got a chance to see Placebo. And when the show was announced in 2018, of course, I was very excited. Echo and the Bunnymen, behind Morrissey and David Bowie, are probably my third favorite recording artists of all time. And I never miss an opportunity to see Echo and the Bunnymen because, as I mentioned before, they are one of the greatest live bands I've ever seen. And the show was announced in 2018, and of course, I was extremely excited. I told my wife that I was going to get tickets, which I always do whenever they come anywhere near me. I'm usually even willing to travel to see Echo and the Bunnymen. That's how good these guys are live. But for some reason, in particular, I think it was around my birthday. I think that's why my wife insisted on buying the tickets for this Echo and the Bunnymen show. And I think it was around my birthday, and of course I was grateful, and I thanked her profusely, and I was not going to lick a gift horse in the mouth, if you know what I mean. So my wife bought the tickets, and I remember pretty much immediately upon her buying the tickets, she was just very overly apologetic about the tickets she got. Now, the Masonic, as I mentioned before, I mean, this is a big old venue, and it's got a big, deep balcony. So there are seats at the Masonic that are probably not the greatest seats of all time. But like I said, the place sounds good. I've always enjoyed going to the Masonic. I don't have any problem with that. I'd seen them a few other places around San Francisco, and the Masonic was as good as any of the other places I've ever seen. Now, I've never seen them play at the Fillmore, which is my favorite venue of all time. Seeing any band that I love at the Fillmore is always, to me, is held in the highest regard. But my wife was sort of, being very apologetic about the tickets that she bought. She said they were terrible. I was going to have a terrible time. We shouldn't even go. Our night was going to be terrible. I was going to be a total jerk about the whole situation, which, in fairness, isn't really like me. Now, I'm not a diva. I'm not necessarily the most high-maintenance person in the world. Sure, I prefer to have better tickets when I go to a show, especially when it's an artist that's in my top 5, like Echo and the Bunnymen have been for many years. But my wife was just very apologetic. And I remember the day of the show, we ended up meeting up with some friends in San Francisco. We were all going to the show together. Now, it was assigned seating, so we all had seats, in different parts of the venue. So we weren't all going to be sitting together, but we all met up for drinks before the show. And my wife kept talking about our tickets like it was just overkill. I remember thinking to myself eventually, okay, I get it. It's going to be a good night. I'm not that picky. Sure, I would prefer if the tickets were a little bit better, but I'm going to have a great time. I love this band. They are great live. I love every one of their tunes that they play. Let's just enjoy our evening. So we got to the show, and my wife just kept going with the quality of our tickets to the point to where I feel like I was okay. Not saying that I sort of doubted it because it was overkill. And she doesn't normally, beat a point to death like that. So we all show up, our friends and I, we all show up. We go to the lobby, we get our merch, we get a drink. And the show's about ready to start. There's no opener, so we all sort of say our goodbyes to each other because most likely we're all going to be heading in different directions after the show anyway. So we say our goodbyes, and I start walking up towards where the balcony stairs are. And my wife sort of tugs at me from behind, and she says, no, we have to go this way. There's a different way up to our seats. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'd never been in the balcony at the Masonic. To this day, I've never been in the balcony of the Masonic. So I was okay, I'll follow along. I'm assuming you know where you're going. And so, of course, we enter into the main, floor, the main auditorium, and we're walking up towards the front, and I'm beginning to be confused, but at the same time, I was also sort of doubting the story she kept telling us about the tickets because, like I said, she kept just beating the point sort of to death. Anyway, long story, a little less long. She ended up buying us buying me front row center tickets to see Echo and the Bunnymen at the Masonic in 2018. That was easily my most favorite show that I've ever seen of theirs. One of my most favorite non-Morrissey shows that I've ever been to in my life. I mean, I was standing right there. We were sitting right there. Ian McCulloch was like standing right in front of us. I could smell his cigarette breath hitting me in the face, and I loved every second of it. The only complaint I have about that show in San Francisco in 2018 was there was a guy who, at a certain point in the show, he came up to the stage with, I don't know if it was a record or a CD or something. I sort of block these memories out when people act this ridiculous. But he came up during the show and asked Ian McCulloch to sign something. And fortunately, Ian McCulloch sort of gave him the business, if you know what I mean. It was disgusting. And, if you've been to San Francisco since the whole, tech takeover, a lot of these people either don't have social skills or their social skills often take the day off. But it was disgusting. And fortunately, Ian McCulloch told the guy to go, get bent, which I thought was beautiful. Made me love you even more than I already do, Mr. McCulloch. Another one of my favorite times seeing Echo and the Bunnymen was my wife and I were traveling cross-country. We were living in New Orleans, and we were en route back to San Francisco. I think this was about 2016. And I'll just keep this story relatively brief, but it was a pretty bad year. We had a pretty rough year and a half. Things weren't necessarily working out. We had moved to New Orleans, and the whole thing just kind of didn't work out the way we had hoped. So we were sort of crawling back to the Bay Area. I don't think this literally, but I think we sort of both felt figuratively as if we were sort of crawling back with our tails between our legs. And we decided to stop in Austin to see Echo and the Bunnymen play at a place called Stubbs in Austin. And Austin is just a city that I happen to enjoy. It's not totally dissimilar to what it's like here in Nashville, but Austin is a great music city. It's a young city. It's got a lot of energy. I understand that it's gotten really expensive and it's become too much of a tech bro hub. But I always enjoy Austin. But we went and saw Echo and the Bunnymen that night, and it was just sort of like the end of a bad year, seeing this band that I am so just incredibly passionate about. And I remember there were a couple points in that show literally where I just wanted to cry, because our experience in New Orleans had not been what we had hoped it was. We were on our way home, which I was so grateful to be heading home. And I was so seeing Echo and the Bunnymen that night, the night that we had left New Orleans. We drove from New Orleans to Austin, and just being out of that ick that we were living in for the past year or so, that we were kind of not at our happiest, and seeing Echo and the Bunnymen, that was honestly, it was one of my favorite shows I've ever been to. But just because of kind of the joy that it brought us, I was just so, and it was such a great show. That was one of the best Echo and the Bunnymen shows I've seen, which is saying a lot, because this band is generally one of the best live bands I've ever seen. One exception, I have to point out, the one time I saw Echo and the Bunnymen where they were not necessarily the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life was in 2017. The band announced a co-headlining tour with the Violent Femmes. And I don't know, I like the Violent Femmes a lot. I'm not saying this as if I don't like the Violent Femmes, because I do. But when that tour was announced, Echo and the Bunnymen and the Violent Femmes, I didn't feel it, man. I didn't really like that pairing. To me, Echo and the Bunnymen are just on another plane than the Violent Femmes, and I like the Violent Femmes. The Violent Femmes are the band that I've seen live probably the most times in my life. I mean, I've seen the Violent Femmes probably over 20 times. So I'm not hating on them. But I just didn't love the pairing, and I knew that Echo and the Bunnymen were going to have to play before the Violent Femmes, which I didn't like. I get weird about that. I think Echo and the Bunnymen are a far superior band to the Violent Femmes. And they were playing this place down in sort of the San Jose area called the Mountain Winery, which is in a place called Saratoga. Now, Saratoga is very beautiful. San Jose is kind of a pit, but Saratoga is beautiful. It's kind of in the hills outside of San Jose. You can see the city of San Jose from the venue, the Mountain Winery. And I remember we got there, and it was just not really a music crowd. It was a winery crowd. It was a bunch of people who were there to sample wine and cheese. And I found out that basically, I think that they sell season tickets. And, of course, they sell tickets to individual events, too. But I think most of the people that were there because they buy these season tickets. And they pretty much go to every weekend shows. And this weekend show just happened to be Echo and the Bunnymen and the Violent Femmes. And I remember walking around this place, and I was thinking to myself, man, this is such a weird crowd. I'm not trying to be like closed-minded Johnson here, but this is not really like your Echo and the Bunnymen crowd. I've been to enough shows to sort of recognize an Echo and the Bunnymen crowd. And the funny thing about the crowd was you had all these sort of suburban stuffed shirts, and then mixed in among them, you had the Echo and the Bunnymen fans that you could easily spot from, 100 yards away. It was sort of amusing. My wife and I were playing the game, Who's Here to See Echo and the Bunnymen? And so showtime is approaching, and it's still really light out, and it's pretty hot. And not that the heat really bothers me, but it was light out, and there was just something about that stuck with me as part of the show I didn't like. And at the very beginning of the show, Brian Ritchie from the Violent Femmes comes out, and he introduces this opening artist. And I cannot remember her name, and I've been looking online trying to find out who it was, but I can't find anything about her. Because I'm almost convinced that she doesn't really exist. Musically, I kind of hope she doesn't exist. Not her personally as a human being. But Brian Ritchie comes out of the Violent Femmes, and he sort of like lectures the crowd about this opening artist. And he tells us that she is pretty much the greatest thing in the world, and if we don't like her, that we are just a bunch of dullards. And she comes out, and I was thinking to myself, okay, I know Echo and the Bunnymen are going to play before Violent Femmes. I mean, that's a given, even though it should totally be flipped the opposite way. And this girl comes out, and she is just literally probably one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. Now, I don't remember her name, and I don't know that I would slander it here after sort of giving that description, but it was just terrible. My wife and I were making commentary in our seats because it was just unbelievably terrible. And the people sitting next to us were these sort of wine and cheese stuffed shirts, and they were sort of offended by my wife and I's observations regarding this artist. And mercifully, her set ends, and it's still light outside, and very light outside. Like, we're not even getting close to dark yet. And again, this is something that is just weird to me. I don't know why. Because I know Echo and the Bunnymen are coming out next. I know that the Violent Femmes are playing last. And sure enough, they set up the stage, and Echo and the Bunnymen come out, and you could just sense that Ian McCulloch did not want to be there. It was just one of those nights. I mean, I've seen every single time I've seen Echo and the Bunnymen, apart from this one time at the Mountain Winery, they have been the Jug's son. But you just got the sense that he didn't want to be there. This crowd they were eating dinner, and they were, talking, and he even made a couple comments like, are we here? Should we even be playing? And I remember this lady sitting next to us was like, who's this Bunnyman? And it was just that sort of feeling like, okay, this band doesn't really belong here. I don't love the fact that they're even touring with the Violent Femmes. And it turned out to be a pretty lackluster show. I mean, Echo and the Bunnymen plowed through probably 15 songs, and they skedaddled it out of there as quickly as they could. And to be honest with you, because I've seen the Violent Femmes like over 20 times, that Echo and the Bunnymen show sort of soured my mood. The crowd was something that I did not want to be around at all. So my wife and I left. We didn't even stay to see the Violent Femmes. So I would say that was the only time in the many times I've ever seen Echo and the Bunnymen that they weren't on top of their game. Anyway, let's get into this ranking a little bit. We have 18 albums to talk about. We're going to be talking about all of the Echo and the Bunnymen studio albums, as well as Ian McCulloch's 4 solo records that are sort of have mixed in here. They are peppered throughout this ranking. Now, I have to tell you that this ranking, if you've watched either of my previous 2, the Morrissey or the David Bowie, both of those rankings to me had some surprises. There was stuff that I sort of really kind of struggled with. There were a few things on this. There were a few albums on this ranking that I thought were sort of close to each other. Ones that could have, kind of been swapped out a little bit. But for the most part, I actually feel like this ranking was pretty straightforward. I kind of had an idea where most things were going to go. This is a band that I've been listening to for 30 years, so I know their catalog, I would suggest, pretty well. So, as I always say, when I do these rankings, feel free to join in the comment section. Join the conversation in the comments section. Let me know where you agree, disagree, where I'm right, where I'm wrong, where you would rank the albums in the Echo and the Bunnymen catalog. So, without any further ado, I know we're already, like 2 minutes? We're only 2 minutes into this. Come on! For me now, number 18, this was the easiest one of all. There's no question which is number 18. This album was released on November 13th, 1990. It was produced by Jeff Emmerich, and this record is Echo and the Bunnymen by name only. And that is their album Reverberation. To me, this album basically has no redeeming qualities. This is the album that the band released without Ian McCulloch. The singer on this record is somebody by the name of Noel Burke. Now, nothing against Noel Burke personally, but this album stinks, and your voice stinks, and the songwriting stinks, and this is a record that I just don't think should exist, much like myself. I remember one time my mom told me, she's like, you know what you remind me of? And I was like, what? What, Mom? She said, you remind me that I'm pro-choice. I was like, awesome. That's how I feel about this record, Reverberation. The only thing interesting about this record is the guitar playing of Will Sargent, who I love. Will Sargent, of course, is one of my favorite guitar players of all time. If you want to hear some pretty decent Will Sargent guitar playing, you can find that on this record. The other thing that I find semi-interesting about this record, and just very semi-interesting about this record, is that it features a drummer by the name of Damon Reese, who replaced Peter DeFreitas, because Peter DeFreitas, unfortunately, passed away the year before this record came out in 1989. So this is a record that just sort of based on principle, I'm against. For me, I don't love the idea of replacing iconic band members. I'm not really a big fan of replacing most people. Human beings are not replaceable. I feel like we're at a point in our culture where we feel like human beings are just sort of disposable. When somebody dies or leaves a band, it's like, oh, next up! And that isn't really the way I see these artists. That isn't really the way I see the world. I mean, imagine the Smiths without Morrissey. Imagine the Clash without Joe Strummer. Imagine the Jam without Paul Weller. It does not work. Nor does Echo and the Bunnymen without Ian McCulloch. Now, I guarantee that there's a guy out there who says that this is their best album. I know there's that guy. I know he's out there. Because I once met a guy who told me that Big Audio Dynamite was better than The Clash, and he said it as if he was saying it with a straight face. Number 19, number 18, number 19, number 20, number 22 out of 18. Doesn't matter. This record should not exist. Reverberation by Echo and the Bunnymen in name only. I never listened to this record. It's just a collection piece at this point in time. And honestly, it's not very good. And like I said, no disrespect to Noel Burke, who is the vocalist on this record. But dude, you cannot duplicate Ian McCulloch. You just can't. And if you're going to replace somebody like Ian McCulloch, don't get a guy who just tries to be an Ian McCulloch parrot, which is what this guy does. It's not good. All right. Number 17. Now we're starting to get into the actual Echo. Now this is the actual ranking. Reverberation was the warm-up band, because that album stinks, son. All right, number 17. This album was released on May 14th, 2001, produced by Ian McCulloch and Will Sargent. The album is Flowers. Now, this is a record that I bought right when it first came out. It was a record that, when I first got it, I liked it. I thought it was interesting. I thought that some of the songs were, pretty cool. This record combines elements of, psychedelic, Britpop, post-punk, post-alternative. This record is very slow. It's very light. It's very dreamy. It's very, airy. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really do a lot. And I find this record to be, if it commits any sort of, crime, it's not that it's a bad record. Apart from Reverberation, Echo and the Bunnymen have never made a bad record. So this is not a bad record. But if it commits any crime, at least in my opinion, it is just a dull, slow drudge to get through this record. And the songwriting to me is not super interesting. Ian McCulloch's vocals on this record are awesome. His vocals are always awesome. And the highlight about Flowers to me, musically, is this does have some really awesome Will Sargent guitar work. I love him. I'll probably mention him a bunch of times throughout this video. He's one of my favorite guitar players of all time. Trying to think of something else positive to say about this record. I love the artwork. Probably one of my favorite Echo and the Bunnymen sleeves. But as far as a record goes, it's just sort of boring. It doesn't really do much. I don't really hardly ever listen to this record. And a lot of times when these songs come up on shuffle, it's sort of skippage. It's not a bad record. I'd say it's about 50-50, which, if your worst record is 50-50, I think you're a pretty awesome band. Some of the songs I like on this record, though, I do like the song King of Kings. I like Super Mellow Man. Everybody Knows is good, and Eternity Turns is awesome, but my favorite song on this record is easily Make Me Shine. I actually really do. I love that record. So for me, number 17 is Flowers from 2001. Number 16, this record came out in 2012. It was produced by Rupert Christie and Andrea Wright, and that is Ian McCulloch's fourth solo album, Pro Patria Mori. Never sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably not. This is a record that when it first came out in 2012, I really liked it a lot. To me, this record is a little bit croony to me. This is sort of Ian McCulloch's version of maybe a modern take on sort of a Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Bobby Darin type record. It has a lot of good stuff on it. I actually like this record more than Flowers. I love Ian McCulloch's voice on this record. I'm not exactly sure what inspired him to release a solo record in 2012, but I do like it. Like I said, he's never really released a bad album. Even Flowers, which is to me the weakest album in the real Echo and the Bunnymen sort of catalog, isn't bad. This one is slightly better. It isn't super, interesting. It's not one that I go back and listen to all the time, but it does have a lot of good songs on it. I like the song Different Trees. Empty as a House is cool. Fiery Flame is really cool. There's a song on here called Me and David Bowie, which I like. It's kind of a tribute, clearly, to David Bowie. It's a little hokey, honestly. Especially considering Ian McCulloch is such an amazing, just brilliant lyricist and songwriter. The song Me and David Bowie is a little bit wonky. I don't know, it's a little bit cheese, but I like it. And of course, David Bowie is my second favorite recording artist of all time, so I appreciate the song. But my favorite song on this record is Somewhere in My Dreams. Man, I love that song. It's easily the best song on this record. That's a song I never get tired of. Okay. For me now, number 15. This is the newest Echo and the Bunnymen record. It came out on October 5th, 2018. It is The Stars, the Oceans, and the Moon. This is the record that they put out, which is basically sort of reimagined versions of old Echo and the Bunnymen songs, along with 2 new tracks, both of which I like. Now, I admit that it's a little bit strange that this record would be ahead of 2 Echo and the Bunnymen records, or at least 1 Echo and 1 Ian record that are both more, original content. But I actually do like this record better than both of theirs. When this record was announced, I have to be perfectly honest with you and tell you that I wasn't, just oozing with anticipation over the announcement of this record. I mean, anytime a band does a record where they're basically reimagining their own catalog, I think it's something that is at least interesting. I mean, recently U2, I think it was just last year, U2 released their huge 40-song record, Songs of Surrender, in which they go through and sort of reimagine, songs throughout their catalog. In the U2 version, the Songs of Surrender, they do a real kind of like stripped down, back to basics sort of approach with it, whereas this one is a lot more sort of grandiose. I think it's a lot more epic. I think that's kind of why I like this record, is sonically it's interesting. Now, you don't necessarily have to go back and, reimagine all of the old Echo and the Bunnymen songs, but it is interesting. Sonically, I love this record. I like the sort of interpretation they do with this record. I mean, this record just got killed by critics when it first came out. And to me, there isn't a single version of a song on this record that is better or as good even as any of the originals. But it's interesting. I like the way, I like this. I like how it sounds sonically, musically. I like the direction the band goes. Some of these old songs too. Ian McCulloch's voice has just changed so much over the years. It's kind of cool to hear him, redo some of these old songs with his voice now. People that, Ian McCulloch, a lot of people give Ian McCulloch grief over the way his voice has aged. And yeah, he's got a lot of cartons of butts in that voice now, but I love his voice. I love how his voice has changed over the years. It really sort of creates a line of demarcation between the 2 eras of this band, which is, of course, the Crocodiles through 87 and then Evergreen through today. You have the 1.0 era and the 2.0 era of Echo and the Bunnymen. I think that's one of the things that makes them interesting, is you have that 10-year gap in between the self-titled record and Evergreen, and those 2 sort of different eras of the band are very unique. And I think one of the things that makes them unique, one is, you don't have Peter DeFreitas and Les Pattinson as the rhythm section on a lot of the 2.0 era. And another thing is Ian McCulloch's voice is so much different than it was back in the early 80s. And I think it's kind of cool to hear him kind of, his gravelly sort of delivery on some of these old songs. Now, the 2 new songs on this record are both decent. I don't think that these are necessarily like, life-changing tunes. I think if these were on a album full of new originals, I think they'd be decent album tracks. I mean, these aren't like necessarily, the greatest records or the greatest songs I've ever heard, but I like this record. I would put it above those first 2. Apart from that, there's a lot of other better stuff in the catalog. It's a record that, if you don't listen to it every single day. I bought it because I'm a huge fan and I pretty much buy everything that they put out, but it's not something that I go back and listen to. It was a morbid curiosity. I'm not going to lie to you. All right, the next album after that is number 14. This album was released in 1995. This was sort of the soft comeback from Echo and the Bunnymen after their 1987 self-titled album in 1987. This is a band by the name of Electrofiction. The album is called Burned. And this, as I mentioned, was sort of the soft, unofficial return to Echo and the Bunnymen since their 1987 self-titled release. This album features Ian McCulloch on vocals and Will Sargent on guitar, but it also features bassist Leon Da Silva and drummer Tony McGinn. And this is an album that I actually really love. This is an album that got past me when it first came out. This was a record that I sort of had to go back and find eventually after I discovered what this album was and what this band was. I don't even really remember hearing this album when it was new or when it was current. I didn't buy this album until long after a lot of the Echo and the Bunnymen 2.0 era records started coming out. This record has a very different sound. It's a very unique record within the sort of Echo and the Bunnymen catalog. It's got like a real kind of, heavier indie rock, kind of almost post-grunge, a little bit of kind of 90s Britpop sound to it. I actually really like this record. This is a record that they just actually reissued for Record Store Day on vinyl. I didn't end up picking up this record on vinyl. I have it on CD, which to me suffice. I don't listen to this record all the time, but I do think it is better than some of the stuff towards the very tail end of the catalog. If you are, for some reason, unfamiliar with this Electric Fiction record, I'm assuming if you're an Echo and the Bunnymen fan, you're not. But if you are unfamiliar with this Electric Fiction record, I would definitely highly recommend going and checking it out. It's got a totally different sound than anything else in the catalog. It's a little bit heavier. It's a little bit more sort of distorted. It's a little bit scuzzier. It's a little bit more kind of like post-grungy. I really like the song Sister Pain. I really like the song Lowdown. I really like the song Zephyr. Too Far Gone is good. My favorite song off this record is Mirror Ball. So that was number 14. Electric Fiction Burned. If you don't have this record, or if you haven't heard it, check it out. It actually just recently showed up on Spotify as well, so it's out there if you want to hear it. Number 13, from 2009, October 12th, 2009 to be exact. This album was produced by John McLaughlin and Simon Perry. It is The Fountain. This is a record that I would describe as being a lot sunnier. It's a lot cheerier. It is a lot sort of bigger and more open than a lot of the Echo and the Bunnymen material in the catalog. Ian McCulloch himself described this album as being probably their happiest and their most upbeat. This was a record, The Fountain, that when it first came out, I was obsessed with it. Of course, Ian McCulloch, when he was interviewed about this record when it was current, he mentioned that this was the greatest album they ever did. I know every band says that over every new album they ever put out, but I actually believed at the time that Ian McCulloch thought that. And for a while, although I would never say that The Fountain is one of my favorite Echo and the Bunnymen albums, I was really into The Fountain for a long time when it first came out. It was a record that I was really into. I loved it. And over time, I would say that, this record came out in 2009, so it's been out for a long time. I would say over the years, this record has sort of like fallen back down to earth. As far as I'm concerned, I really like the good stuff on this record. This record is good. This record is like 70% really, really good. Maybe 25, 30%, a tiny bit of clunkage. I love his voice on this song. I love the guitar work. Like I said, it's a different sound. It's cheerier. It's sunnier. It's a little bit uncomfortable if you're a huge fan of Echo and the Bunnymen, because it is so much different in that sense than a lot of their sort of gloomier type material. But I really like this album. I love his voice on it. I love a lot of the guitar work by Will Sargent. I really love the song Do You Know Who I Am? Shroud of Turin. Life of a Thousand Crimes is awesome. Proxy is great. Idleness of Gods is killer, but to me, my favorite song on this album is I Think You Need It Too. That song is snug. All right, number 12. The next record from June 3rd, 2014, produced by Andrea Wright and Youth. The album is Meteorites. Ironic in a sense that this record follows The Fountain chronologically, because this album is like miserable. This is a dark, gloomy, downtrodden piece of music right here. And it's funny coming out of Fountains because this feels a little bit more, like Echo and the Bunnymen's natural habitat, maybe a little bit kind of extreme. I think this is actually, one of the darker records they ever did. It's definitely moody, it's heavy, it's melancholy, it's got a sort of slow, deliberate kind of delivery. I love Ian McCulloch's voice on this. It is like broken glass. I mean, it is awesome. I saw this tour in San Francisco, and this tour blew me away. I loved seeing these songs live. Now, you go and you see Echo and the Bunnymen live, most shows that they do, if they're not promoting an album, and this is like a very minuscule complaint, but one thing I'll say about seeing Echo and the Bunnymen live is, unless they're promoting a specific album, their set list sort of tends to become pretty predictable from tour to tour, especially if they're just doing kind of like hey, we're going out on tour. So seeing this tour live and actually seeing some of these songs live was awesome, because this album is the goods, in my opinion. I like this album a lot more than I like The Fountain. Now, I realize The Fountain was just the last record I talked about, but the gap between The Fountain and this record is actually pretty substantial. I love Meteorites. To me, man, there really isn't much clunkage on this record at all. I love the title track. I love the song Holy Moses. Is This a Breakdown? Lovers on the Run. Burn It Down. But if I had to pick a favorite song off Meteorites, it'd probably be Constantinople. And they played that song that night in San Francisco, and they killed that song. All right, the next album after that is number 11. This is Ian McCulloch's third solo album. The album is called Slidling. It was produced by Senzo Townsend, and it was released on April 28th, 2003. This is another record I sort of wonder why he decided to put out a solo record in 2003. I mean, Echo and the Bunnymen were back. They were firing on all cylinders. They were putting out some incredible records. So I'm sort of curious as to why he decided to put out Slidling. That being said, I'm glad he did, because the record Slidling is really, really good. I would take it by a little bit over Meteorites. I think those are two of the records in the catalog that are pretty close to each other. I was actually kind of surprised, to be perfectly honest with you, that Slidling slid this far down in the ranking, because this is an album that I actually listened to a lot. It combines elements of indie pop, indie rock, Britpop, and dark wave. I love the song Love in Veins. I love the song Slidling, which happens to feature Chris Martin from Coldplay on vocals, backing vocals. The song Playgrounds and City Parks is probably my favorite song on Slidling. I also like Seasons and High Wires. But for me, that is number 11. Ian McCulloch's third solo album, Slidling. Number 10, from March 17th, 1992. This album was produced by Mark Saunders. It is Ian McCulloch's second solo album, and that is Mysterio. This is a record that I absolutely love. This is a record that I would say has very, very limited amount of clunkage on it. Of course, this record was put out while Echo and the Bunnymen were on hiatus. And this is a record that, to me, it kind of sounds sort of like classic Echo and the Bunnymen, apart from the fact that, of course, you don't have Will Sargent on guitar, who I think is as a big part of the sound of Echo and the Bunnymen as is Ian McCulloch's voice and his lyrics. This record combines elements of indie pop, indie rock, Britpop, space pop, neo-psychedelic, and top 40. This is a record that I still to this day listen to in very heavy rotation. This was the very first Ian McCulloch solo record I ever bought. I bought this one before I bought Candleland, which I like a little bit better, but this is a record that I still listen to all the time. It has, man, there's really not much clunkage on this record at all. I really like the song Magical World, Dug for Love, Honey Drip. I love the song Webbed. But if I had to pick a favorite song off Mysterio, it would probably be Lover, 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 which of course is the Leonard Cohen song. So for me, that record is number 10. Number 9 now. Ooh, this one's pretty good. This is another 2 records that were kind of like back and forth with each other. This is a record that came out on July 14th, 1997. It was produced by the band, Echo and the Bunnymen, and it's called Evergreen. This was this was their return after a 10-year hiatus since the release of their 1987 self-titled record. This band featured all 3 of the surviving original members. So this was actually all 3 of the original members. Peter DeFreitas, of course, came in a little bit later, but he had passed away, sadly, by 1997 when the band released this album. I remember the first time I heard anything off of this record. It was the song I Want to Be There When You Come. I remember hearing it either on the radio or on MTV. And this was probably just maybe 2 years after I sort of discovered Echo and the Bunnymen, and I was a pretty big fan. Maybe not quite on the level that I am now, but I remember when that first single, I Want to Be There When You Come, came out, I was all in. I was like, man, that sounds pretty snug to me. You know, if you're going to wait 10 years in between albums, you better have some pretty high quality material to sort of, justify that length of time being away. And this record to me is incredible. I love Evergreen. I listen to this record all the time. It combines elements of indie pop, indie rock, psych pop, Brit pop, maybe a tiny bit of sort of like post-grunge or sort of generic alternative rock. Some of my favorite songs off this record are Don't Let It Get You Down, In My Time. I love that song. I Want to Be There When You Come. I love the title track, Evergreen. I'll Fly Tonight, Altamont. I mean, there's really nothing too bad on this record. I mean, I don't love the song Baseball Bill. For some reason, that's the only song off this record that, to me, is sort of skippage. But my favorite song off this record is Nothing Lasts Forever. That's easy. I love that song. So for me, number 9 is Evergreen from 1997. All right, number 8. Now, this is an album that I would say it sort of surprised me how far it fell in the ranking. And 8 is very respectable. We're in the top 10. There's only 18 records to talk about. So, it's not necessarily towards the top either. And I said this when it came to the David Bowie ranking I did when I was talking about The Man Who Sold the World, that this is probably my most controversial pick. Ooh, watch out. On this ranking, and that is their 1981 second album from May 29th, 1981, produced by Hugh Jones, Heaven Up Here. Now, I realized that a lot of people would have this record a lot higher than 8th if they were going to be doing a ranking of the Echo and the Bunnymen / Ian McCulloch catalog. But in my opinion, this is the weakest of the 1.0 era. It has great songs. This is a great album. I'm not throwing shade. This is a great album. That's how good Echo and the Bunnymen are. A great album is number 8. It's just not quite as good as some of the stuff that's coming up, man. I don't know what to tell you. That's how good these guys are. Don't take it up with me, man. Take it up with Ian McCulloch and Will Sargent, because they're the ones responsible for this. This album contains elements of post-punk, new wave, and psychedelic pop. I really love this record. I'm not throwing shade. Saying it's number 8 is in no way a diss. There's really not much on this album I don't like. I love the song With a Hip, Over the Wall. It Was a Pleasure. Promise is obviously awesome. I love the title track. Turquoise Days. But this is a tough one too. If I had to pick a fair song off Heaven Up Here, it's probably Show of Strength. I love that song, man. I love this. I love this album. Not throwing shade, man. Number 8 from 1981. All right, number 7. This album was released on September 20th, 2005. It was also produced by Hugh Jones, coincidentally. And that is the band's album, Siberia. To me, this album is sort of criminally underrated within the kind of Echo and the Bunnymen fan base. This is a record that I do genuinely like better than Heaven Up Here. This is a record that I bought right when it came out, and I loved it then. I love it now. I feel like my feelings about this record are probably the most consistent of any of the 2.0 era records within the Echo and the Bunnymen catalog, because I bought this record when it came out, loved it. Loved everything about it. And I pretty much still do. There really isn't anything on this record that is substandard at all. This record contains elements of Britpop, indie pop, indie folk, indie psychedelic pop. I love the song Stormy Weather, All Because of You, Parthenon Drive. Are you serious, son? Of a Life, Make Us Blind. Oh my God, I love that song. Everything Kills You, the title track, Siberia, Sideways, Scissors in the Sand, What If We Are. My favorite song on this record is Easy, though. Not a struggle for this one. It is In the Margins. This is a record that I was talking earlier about, that year that we lived in New Orleans. A year that was not necessarily the happiest of our lives. And the song In the Margins is a song that I used to listen to almost every single day on my way to work. And it kind of got me through that year. And we went to see Echo and the Bunnymen in Austin on our road trip from New Orleans back to San Francisco. And I don't know that I shouldn't say this because I may have, but I almost feel as if I hadn't seen them play In the Margins, at least for a while, before I saw them play it in Austin in 2016. And man, I almost started crying, man. I'm not kidding. It was the second song they played, too. They went right basically into it. I was like, oh, thank you. Not proud of myself. I'm not bragging here. Anyway. Number 6. This album was released on September 17th, 1989. It was produced by Ray Shulman. This is an album that is Ian McCulloch's first solo record following his departure from the band Echo and the Bunnymen. It is the album Candleland. This album was released just several months after the passing of Echo drummer Peter DeFreitas. This record, to me, is every bit as good as anything else in the Echo and the Bunnymen 1.0 catalog. Apart from the fact that I would love to hear these tracks with the Echo and the Bunnymen lineup, especially Will Sargent on guitar. This record I never get tired of. I listen to this record all the time. This is easily Ian McCulloch's best solo album. And this is a record that, like I said, I bought Mysterio before I bought this one, but this is the one that has stuck the most to me. I never get tired of this record. This is almost a perfect album as far as I'm concerned. It contains elements of post-punk, post-pop, indie rock, and some sort of psychedelic pop. Oh my God, every song on this record is the jugs, in my opinion. I love The Flickering Wall, White Hotel, Candleland, Faith and Healing. I mean, you can go through all the tracks. Faith and Healing. My favorite song on this album is... This is a tough one because this... Oh my God. It's kind of a generic choice, admittedly, but I'm going to go with Proud to Fall. My favorite song of that one. Proud to Fall. All right. Now we're getting pretty good. Now we're in the top 5. I realize you probably hung yourself 10 minutes ago. And I'm just still sitting here yakking. We're getting there, man. You'll get there. Anyway, this record came out on February 4th, 1983. It was produced by Ian Brody of the Lightning Seeds. By the way, sort of off topic, I am working on a Lightning Seeds album ranked episode as we speak because I love the Lightning Seeds. To me, they are one of the most underrated bands ever, of all time, of any genre ever. So it is my mission in life to spread the word on the Lightning Seeds as much as possible. But he produced this record. That is Porcupine, number 5. This record, to me, is just about a perfect record. Again, it combines elements of post-punk, dark wave, and psychedelic pop. This is a record that I remember seeing some of the videos for these songs as a little kid, and it might have been the first time I ever saw the band Echo and the Bunnymen, and when I disapproved of their name. But to me, this is one of the early records that I go back and listen to all the time. Pretty much anything within the band's 1.0 era is borderline masterpiece / perfection. This record is no different. I love the song Cutter. My White Devil, Clay, Porcupine, Heads Will Roll, Gods Will Be Gods, In Bluer Skies. I mean, the song Ripeness is okay. I mean, it's really good. It's unfortunately on a record this good, it stands out as sort of not being great because it's not as good as some of the other stuff on this record. But to me, my favorite song on this record is The Back of Love. Easily. I love that song. So that is number 5, Porcupine. Number 4. This is easily undebatably, for that matter, the best record of Echo and the Bunnymen's 2.0 era from 1999, April 5th of 1999, produced by Alan Douglas. What are you going to do with your life? This, to me, is the best album in the band's 2.0 era. And for some reason, I will never understand this. The band seems to have completely turned their back on this record. It's almost as if they've disowned it. And I will never, ever, ever understand, because to me, this is the masterpiece of the 2.0 era. This record kills Evergreen, and it pretty much demolishes everything else after the 1987, self-titled. This record is almost perfect. This is a record I think even among the fan base kind of gets forgotten. I will never understand that. To me, this record is start to finish is one of my favorite records within the band's catalog of all time. I listened to this record. This actually might be the record I listen to the most, even more than the stuff that's ahead of it in the ranking, at least in my opinion. This album contains elements of indie pop, dream pop, indie rock, Brit pop. This is almost a perfect album. I have no idea why the band, and I think a big chunk of the fan base, has sort of like forgotten about what are you going to do with your life. I mean, there's not a bad song on this entire record. I love the title track. I love Rust, Baby Rain, History Chimes, Lost on You. I mean, these are the goods, son. If I had to pick a favorite song off What Are You Gonna Do With Your Life? I mean, get in the car, probably. Everything. It's all good. All right, now we're in the top 3. This was fairly predictable as far as I was concerned. I think What Are You Gonna Do With Your Life and Porcupine, that was the last one that was kind of like tough, because I think both those records could sort of, kind of leapfrog each other a little bit. For me, the rest of this way, 1 through 1, 1 through 3, however you want to look at it, was pretty predictable as far as I was concerned. Number 3 for me is from July 18th, 1980, produced by Ian Brody of the Lightning Seeds. That is the band's debut album, Crocodiles. To me, this is my second favorite debut album of all time. Behind only the Smiths' 1984 self-titled debut. That's how good this record is to me. It's only behind the Smiths' 1984 self-titled record. I love this album. There's not a bad song on this entire album. So you can go through all the track listing if you'd like, but just know that it's all snug. This record combines elements of post-punk, dark wave, psychedelic pop, new wave. Every single song on this record is the jugs. Going Up. One thing I'll say about Going Up is it's funny because every time I've seen Echo and the Bunnymen, which is several, many I would suggest. I don't know the exact number, but it's a fair amount. Not as many times as I've seen Morrissey or the Violent Femmes, for that matter, but a lot, I'll say. Every single time I've seen Echo and the Bunnymen live, they start with the song Going Up. That's just sort of their kickoff song, and I ain't even complaining because every time I hear that song, it gets me hopping. I love that song. I love the song Stars Are Stars, Monkeys, Rescue, Figures Terrace, all that jazz, Happy Death Men. There's not a bad song on this entire album. As far as picking a favorite, though, I guess I'll go with Going Up, just because it is the first song they play live, usually, and I'm always so excited to see them live that I guess I'll go with that. All right, number 2. Again, this one was pretty easy. I knew where this one was going to be when I started. This is a record that I listen to all the time, still to this day. It was released on July 6th, 1987, produced by Lori Latham. It is the 1987 self-titled Echo and the Bunnymen record. Of course, this was the last record that they would put out for 10 years. This was the last record which featured drummer Peter DeFreitas, who sadly passed away in 1989. And to me, this is as good a record as there is. I think the band was a little bit disappointed by the commercial performance of this record. I don't think that this record lived up to the standards or the expectations that they had sort of put on it. If you go back and you look at 1987, though, and you look at that year in music, there were a lot of big guns that came out in 1987. To me, this is one of the best. This is definitely not as good as Strange Ways by the Smiths, but this record is, it is right up there. This might be my second favorite record from 1987. I'd have to sort of go back and actually do some research before I actually say that. But I know it's not as good as Strange Ways by the Smiths, but this is a record that I never get tired of. I just never get tired of this record. To me, I think this was the first CD of theirs I ever bought, and it's still my second favorite. You can go through all the songs if you'd like, but I think you'll find that they are all pretty tight. This album sort of contains elements of pop rock, indie pop, top 40, Britpop, and post-punk. Like I said, I think that the band was sort of disappointed that this record didn't, sort of break them off into a sort of another level of the stratosphere. But, all that at the end of the day doesn't mean anything. A record's popularity, a record's commercial success, its chart positioning means nothing. This is as good a record as anything that came out in 1987. Of course, the cover always reminds me of the cover of the Joshua Tree by U2, at least like the photograph of the band. But apart from Strange Ways, Here We Come by the Smiths, this is as good a record as anything that came out in 1987. My favorite song off this record is The Game. Easily. That's not even something I have to think about, but I love Over You, I love Bedbugs, All in Your Mind, Bombers Bay, I love Lost and Found, New Direction, Satellite, All My Life. I will say this, and I'm not saying this to be the guy that says this, but, it's not a bad song. But if I never heard the song Lips Like Sugar ever again, I think I'd survive just fine. All right, that brings us to number 1. You made it! You made it, son. From 1984, May 4th of 1984 to be exact, produced by Gil Norton. Ocean Rain, this is their greatest album of all time. I mean, there's not a bad song on this entire album. This is as perfect an album as I've ever heard in my entire life. It's not as good as the Smiths album from 1984, I will say that. See a pattern developing here. Anyway, this album contains elements of post-punk, new wave, synth pop, psychedelic pop, and dark wave. I love the song Nocturnal Me, Crystal Days, Yo-Yo Man, Thorn of Crowns. The thing I always think about when I listen to this record, which is all the time, still a record I listen to on very, very, very heavy rotation. The song Killing Moon, which I love. I never get tired of it. I just mentioned that I'm kind of burnt out on Lips Like Sugar. But Killing Moon is a song I never get tired of. But whenever you see Echo and the Bunnymen live, Ian McCulloch always describes this song as the greatest song ever written. And there's something about that I love. I love the fact that Ian McCulloch suffers no lack of self-esteem. I love his ego. I love that he actually has the plums to stand on stage and say that to a room full of strangers. I love that. And I do love the song Killing Moon. There's no question. Seven Seas is amazing. One of my favorite videos of the band. My Kingdom. I mean, it's a great song. So if I'm saying my least favorite song, it's still a great song. This album's perfect. I mean, this album is start to finish one of the most perfect albums of all time. But if I had to pick a weakest song, it would be the title track, Ocean Rain. My all-time favorite Echo and the Bunnymen song ever is Silver, which is my favorite song on this record. And that's not even why this is my favorite album. This is just the best. But Silver is my favorite song by Echo and the Bunnymen. So there you have it. Number 18 through 1, ranking my third favorite artists of all time. The greatest band ever to come out of Liverpool, England. The mighty, iconic, legendary Echo and the Bunnymen. Let me show you a few more things real quick before I get out of here. Things that you should check out if you are a fan of Echo and the Bunnymen or Ian McCulloch. The first thing I'd like to recommend is this book, a biography of Ian McCulloch called The King of Cool, which he certainly is. Ian McCulloch is one of the coolest, band members of all time. That was the thing about Echo and the Bunnymen back in the days. I was talking about it. At the beginning of the episode, this was thought of as being one of the most influential and important bands of the entire post-punk era. But at the risk of sounding superficial, I mean, was there ever a band cooler than Echo and the Bunnymen? I think not. So referring to Ian McCulloch as the king of cool, I think is apropos. Another great book about the band is this book here by Chris Adams. This book is called Turquoise Days. The Weird World of Echo and the Bunnymen. This is a great book also. Also, I would highly recommend, although I haven't read it yet, I'm backlogged a little bit, so I shouldn't recommend it without reading it, but of course Will Sargent just put out his biography, Bunnyman, which I have. I forgot to pull it out, but I'm kind of backlogged as far as books go right now, but I'm very excited actually to read Will Sargent's book. A couple DVDs to check out is Live in Liverpool. This was released in 2002. The band playing a hometown show in England. Another one, this DVD is called Dancing Horses. This was recorded in 2005. A couple of great live performances by the band. If you haven't seen them live, check out these DVDs and you will see why I heap so much praise upon them as a live band. One more thing real quick to check out if you ever get a chance, you see it somewhere, is this box set, Crystal Days, 1979 to 1999, a 4-disc collection with a awesome book. Obviously, I bought this at Amoeba. I hate when they put the sticker right on the packaging. But I found this at Amoeba in San Francisco many years ago. And I ain't parting ways with it, son. But check out this Crystal Days 4-disc box set. It is pretty snug. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie. Coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, talk to you then.